Just curious on some thoughts here. I don't believe that there's been a bill that's been introduced yet, but there's some pretty serious discussion happening on the possibility of having driver's license exams and testing books be available in Spanish. There's an estimated 8,000 Spanish-speaking individuals in South Dakota who are legal here, that they could fill some jobs if they could actually drive to work. They just can't drive there because right now they have to bring, you're allowed to bring an interpreter, but they have to pay for it themselves, which is somewhat challenging. So just curious to see if anybody had any thoughts on the potential of that actually matriculating into an actual bill and what the chances might be to make that happen. Thank you.
Better looking.
I didn't know that. Don't.
I do have a little bit of background information on that, and I'm also trying to find the second reference here. I had signed on to a bill, and the bill that I've found in the system isn't the one that I've signed on to. So there's currently a bill, and I think Mike was giving the sign language in the back there. Senate Bill 117 has been introduced, authorize other languages to be used in the process of issuing certain driver's licenses and permits. I think there's another one out there that may or may not be dropped, but I had a lady from one of the chambers of commerce from one of the larger towns come to me and just say, can I have a few minutes of your time? And I said, yeah. And she said, you know, we keep bringing these bills seeking to allow for the testing in Spanish specifically. She said, we're not asking for a lot of different languages, but we're asking for that large minority population to be able to test in their own language. And she said, I recognize that it's always met with opposition, and on some levels I can understand some of the concerns, but she said, we have a workforce development issue. And she said, one of the things that we just are not helping with is when we're denying people even the opportunity to take a test in the language that they understand, we're not giving them a fair shake, and then what are they doing? They're in some cases driving without, and in some cases, which obviously doesn't make us any safer, and in some cases they're moving on, and that doesn't help with respect to workforce development. And she really sang to my heart. And it went back to actually a situation that happened right here in town on December 14th when I had my DOT physical. And I was told by my doctor to go out to the DMV and have them deal with whatever my little card. Oh, he said, or you can do it, you can submit it the way you normally do. Well, I did go out there, and I stood in line for 15 minutes as the people out there tried to communicate with Spanish-speaking individuals, and it was a very difficult process, and there was nothing that bridged the language barrier. There were no, obviously, interpreters, and the one who understood a little bit of English didn't understand a lot of English, so helped to interpret when he could, but looked very, like a deer in the headlights at other times, like, I don't know what you're saying. And I just thought, this process has to be able to be better. And I've learned that there's technology available. I didn't know this. There's technology available that will allow me to take this piece of paper with some of Carl's writings on it, and I don't know if it would recognize a person's handprinting or handwriting, but if it's typewritten, it will recognize that, and it will change. The app will actually change the language. So as I'm reading English, by just looking at it here, if I put it on this side of my screen, it changes it to Spanish. And I do think we're going to be able to figure something out. That's the good news. I actually, as I was talking with that individual from the Chamber of Commerce, I kept calling in other members of the leadership team, and I don't remember if Al joined us during that discussion, but a number of us were present, and it just happened that they were all happening along at the most opportune moment. And so I hope that there are brighter days ahead, better days ahead with respect to the issue, Mike, and I appreciate the question.
I think that that would be wonderful. I think we need to be as accommodating as possible. Recently, I was in an Uber cab, and a great story. The gentleman that, when I got in this Uber, couldn't speak English at all. And so I didn't know that at the beginning, but so I just started talking, and he held up his smartphone, and I talked into it. And as I talked into it, it translated it to Spanish, and then he read it. And then he talked back into this smartphone, and I got the English. But the conversation we had because of that was amazing. Ordinary conversation. I said, "Where are you from?" He says, "Venezuela." Well, if you've been reading about what's happening in Venezuela, that's pretty big. So I wanted to know about it. I says, "How long you been here?" He said, "1 year." I said, "What'd you used to do in Venezuela?" We had this conversation. He said, "I used to be a judge." I said, "You're an Uber driver, you're a judge." He says, "Yeah." And we weren't talking back and forth, we were talking through the smartphone. He says, basically what he said, he'd rather be an Uber driver in the United States than a judge in Venezuela. That's a pretty good endorsement of the United States. So with that, I guess the answer is yes. It would make sense that we allow them to become part of our workforce. And if they can't speak English at work, we'll just give them a smartphone and they can do what we did. And it worked out pretty well. The other thing I'll let you know on, talking about workforce getting to work, lobbyist Julie Johnson and I are working on a big project, electric bicycles. So if you want to know more about electric bicycles, Julie's the person to talk to. And I suspect I'm going to be the prime sponsor of that. And I think that could be a big breakthrough for you, Mike, is electric bicycles. So just stay tuned to that as we progress. So thank you.
Al's actually going to be the first Uber electric bicycle.
On this particular issue, I think it's really important for us to be able to think outside the box and do things different than we did before. If we want to talk about the real issue here is diversity, and the real issue here is change. We need to adapt to change, and we need to be diverse in the way we think and the way we do things. We can't do things the way we always used to do them and expect a new outcome. That is the definition of insanity. We have to make changes, and they're not always going to be popular. When we say, well, the language is English, everybody should be English. Well, if we have a large percentage of our population that's Spanish, we need to be able to recognize that and make changes and act accordingly. I am far from being totally old-fashioned, but I will tell you this, that if you're not ready to change, we cannot move forward. I think that Spanish is a good step, and someday we'll probably have another step that we need to take. I'm not sure what step that'll be, but I think we should open our arms for these things and be inclusive and get things going in the right way. The little things like going and get a driver's license, it is so important to somebody. And if we make them feel like it's important to us too, they might really like being here, and they might really like being part of our workforce, and that will make Mike Bockerny's job easier. And we want to make Mike Bockerny's job easier. That's all I've got to say on that.